Clearly, the big question is that which are the key sectors which will be the focus area for the government, and what are the sectors that can look for some relief, Ridhima? And the key question, of course, is also going to be about the insurance, the medical sector, pharmaceuticals. Everybody is looking for a boost this season.
Absolutely, Anusha. As you've been saying, this is going to be a budget which is going to talk about recovery. It is going to talk about a roadmap. So let's just talk about some sectors. The healthcare sector, for example, this is a sector that is looking for increased expenditure, increased allocation, lower GST rates for life-saving drugs. Anusha, what the healthcare sector has been saying, that you need to get a rationalization of the GST slabs from your 18% to 12%, get one GST slab, which is around 5%. So those are kind of incentives that the healthcare sector will be looking at.
And tourism, of course, one of the worstest industries this pandemic has been the tourism sector. IT deductions, boost on domestic travel and tourism, many incentives that the local tourism industry would want for local stipends or some kind of remuneration or benefit that can be given to the local tourist guides, small industries that have suffered, hotel industry, which hugely suffered a setback during this pandemic and is reeling under losses, will look for some kind of relief.
Absolutely. Not just tourism and travel. Yes, as you rightly pointed out, because of the lockdowns, they did see a big shutdown. So they will be looking at stimulus. But if you talk about some other sectors, I mean, look at the startup sector. They will be looking at some sort of rationalization as far as tax is concerned, a comprehensive tax code for all startups. Interestingly, despite being in the middle of a pandemic, startups actually have been one sector that have actually done pretty well. If you look at the number of unicorns that were just added in 2021, there were about 40, and there have been about 3 to 4 that have been already added in this year as well.
And if you want to create more jobs in the country, infrastructure is one sector where the capital expenditure or the expenditure of the government can go up. That's one sector we're looking at. Increase the budgetary support by 15 to 20%, and not just give government or the government-owned PSUs or special purpose vehicles the avenues to create more infrastructure, but also boost private consumption and real estate property buying in those trends. Let's talk about another important sector, which is the MSME.
Absolutely, and this is something that we've been speaking for months at length. Your small and medium enterprises, what are they looking for? They're looking for extending their incentives for cashless transactions. The pandemic hasn't been easy. The one thing that the pandemic really has thrown open has been the disparity that we've seen between the rich and the poor. How do you bring that sense of equilibrium and equality back? I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, and the MSMEs, of course, will be hoping for some sort of revival there.
Housing for everyone, the key promise of the Prime Minister. Of course, that's one promise they're looking at. But to make sure that the real estate sector picks up, home loans have been growing at a very abysmal rate. Compared to the kind of economy we are, a growing economy, we should have a double-digit growth. That's not there. Roughly about 8% growth, which most experts would say is not a good growth.
Which actually isn't so bad, Anusha, because even if you look at the pre-pandemic levels, we were growing anywhere between 5 to 5.5%.
But doesn't that also
have to do... post-COVID recovery and 8.5%, an estimate wouldn't be that bad.
But doesn't that also have to do with the fact that most of your real estate giants are at the Supreme Court and fighting some battles, and most of the people that we're talking about are not really getting the kind of recoveries or the possessions that they wanted?
Absolutely. So we'll continue analyzing what we can expect from the budget, what is the kind of stimulus that can be brought in. But let me bring in our guests as well. Priti Upadhyay, Associate Fellow, CSIS Vadhwani Chair in US India Policy Studies. Mitali Nikore is an economist. Gaurav Choudhury is a consultant with Money Control. Good morning, all of you. Good to have you on the broadcast with us. Mitali, let me begin with you. It's good that we're keeping up with our yearly budget tradition. What are the big expectations that you're looking at? Some sectors that we already played out in terms of healthcare, education, creation of jobs. What is your wish list?
So I think, Ridhima, the economic survey has been very exciting because it actually has a whole chapter around job creation, social infrastructure. Then there is another whole chapter around climate finance. So, it's a harbinger of things to come, that it might be something, very different in this budget. So, but my real expectations, very honestly, definitely I'm expecting that agriculture sector and agriculture infrastructure will get a huge boost. That's number one. Number two is around job creation. And I think that this time there will be a focus on job creation for women. Because at this point, it has been recognized that the COVID-19 pandemic has a disproportionate impact on women's jobs. And I think number three, we'll see a huge focus on technology and digitization, which till now we haven't actually talked about. But I really think that, in keeping with the vision of the 1 trillion digital economy, there will be a huge thrust and investment into digitization, recognizing, of course, that the COVID pandemic led to a situation where digitization became a need rather than a luxury. And probably we will see investments in rural digital services and infrastructure as well.
Okay.
And taking that point forward from Mitali, I'm coming to you, Gaurav. Good morning to everyone. Anusha this side. If we're talking about, Gaurav, the agriculture sector or talking about more job creations, that means the government will have to shed more money. If we are looking for some kind of fiscal discipline, does that really sit with it? At a time when we are looking to boost the economy, a lot of giveaways to the agricultural sector, the MSMEs, a lot of industries were looking for some kind of packages. But especially talking about the agricultural sector and job creation, what are the key things to watch out for in this budget? What are the possible steps that the finance minister can take, Gaurav?
Absolutely. Morning. The timing of the budget is very, very crucial this time, unlike the previous year. The similarity is that like last year, this time also the budget comes right in the middle of the pandemic. Yeah. So it has to be a booster budget of sorts. So that expectation is extremely heightened and very rightly so. But the difference between last year and this time is that this time the government has actually rolled back the 3 agricultural laws when the budget is being presented. And that is being, those laws were actually being billed as the biggest reform to have ever undertaken in independent India, one of the biggest reforms. Now, having rolled back those laws, what does the government do? Because agriculture, regardless of whether the laws are in place or the laws have been rolled back, remains India's most unreformed sector. What do farmers want? Farmers want access to markets. The laws were predicated upon a certain assumption that they are going to actually facilitate easier and more efficient access to markets and get them fair and remunerative and also profitable price. But since the laws are now, the laws have been rolled back, how does the government actually ensure that access to markets to farmers are actually given? That is something that's going to be a very tricky bit, because you cannot cut out checks and give to farmers, which the government has been doing for some time now, and you cannot keep on enhancing that. In the absence of that, in the absence of an income support scheme, what does the government do? So I expect a lot of things to come in the form of incentives for use of big data, artificial intelligence, analytics, and technologies like drones, etc., which is actually going to incentivize startups to go and set up enterprises in and around villages, which actually gives access to farmers' produce to markets. So an indication of that was actually seen in one of the small paragraphs in the economic survey itself, when the principal economic advisor actually made a very pertinent point when he said that it is important to bring in artificial intelligence and technologies like drone, etc., for farmers to get easier access and a more efficient access to markets. And that is how it will help in times of glut, and it will also protect consumers in times of price shocks. That is something that I really expect the government to do, because I expect the finance minister to expend a considerable amount of time talking about farming and agriculture, particularly because we're in the middle of the elections in 2 states where farmers from these 2 states, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, were at the forefront of the sweeping protests that took place on the borders of Delhi for almost 14 months. There has to be, the phraseology of the budget speech is going to be politically very, very important, of how the finance minister actually reaches out to farmers without actually going back and telling them that we're going to bring back the laws, because that is going to be politically naive. But having said that, there is going to be an outreach that can be seen and heard in the phraseology of the speech itself, and that is what I expect the finance minister to do. The other thing is also on MSMEs, which remains MSMEs. There are about 60 million MSMEs in India, employing about 110 million people, contributing about 45% of India's manufacturing sector, and it remains the lifeblood of the Indian manufacturing sector. They remain the worst. They remain the worst affected from the pandemic. They are still to recover from the debilitating consequences of the pandemic. So I expect the finance minister to extend some of the incentives and SOPs that were given during the pandemic to be extended by about a year or so.
Okay. Interesting that you mentioned all these points, Gaurav, and we'll of course deep dive into them. But because we just